He didn't even look me in the eye. After everything. After the sleepless nights coding until dawn, after liquidating my entire portfolio, after walking away from my six-figure job at Goldman to bootstrap his dream, I walked into the boardroom and found my own security badge deactivated. Effective immediately, your services are no longer required, the email had said. Not from him, from HR. My own brother couldn't even fire me himself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Natalie Hartwell, and from wherever you're watching this, buckle up. Have you ever poured your entire life savings into someone you trusted more than yourself, only to watch them use your own money to destroy you? The tech world taught me that trust is a luxury, but I never thought I'd need to guard my heart against my own blood. That morning started like any other Tuesday at Prism Analytics, the data visualization company I'd built from nothing with my brother Dylan. I grabbed my usual lavender latte from the café downstairs, badged into our sleek office in downtown Millhaven, and walked toward the corner office I'd earned through 18-hour days and a $1.2 million personal investment. But my badge beeped red. Denied access. I tried again, thinking it was a glitch. Red. Again. The security guard, Tommy, who I'd hired myself, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait in the lobby," he mumbled, and I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. That's when I saw her, Cassandra Price, immaculate in her $1,000 blazer, walking out of what used to be my office, carrying what looked suspiciously like my files. The same Cassandra who'd been circling our company like a vulture for months, representing some Silicon Valley investment firm called Nexus Capital, the same Cassandra who Dylan had been having increasingly secretive lunch meetings with. She smiled at me. Actually smiled, like she'd just won something I didn't even know I was competing for. "Natalie," she purred, extending a manicured hand I refused to shake. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to chat. There are going to be some significant changes around here." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a system error. This wasn't a mistake. This was a coup, and my own brother was behind it? I found Dylan in the main conference room, the one with the glass walls I'd insisted on because transparency was supposedly our company value. He was surrounded by suits I didn't recognize, laptops open, documents spread across the mahogany table I'd bought with my own credit card when we couldn't afford office furniture. "Dylan," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "what's going on?" He couldn't look at me. My little brother, who I taught to code when he was 12, who I bailed out of every financial mess since college, who cried in my apartment just 3 years ago because he couldn't make rent, sat there shuffling papers like a stranger. "Natalie, we need to talk, but not here, not now." "Not here?" I laughed, but it came out sharp and bitter. "This is my company. I built this. We built this. Together." One of the suits, a man with silver hair and dead eyes, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm afraid that's not entirely accurate anymore. As of yesterday's board meeting, there have been some structural changes to the company hierarchy." My blood turned to ice. "What board meeting? I'm on the board. I'm the co-founder and CTO." Cassandra stepped into the room behind me, and I felt trapped between predators. "Were," she corrected gently. "You were the CTO. The board voted last night to restructure operations under new leadership. More experienced leadership." I turned to Dylan, waiting for him to defend me, to explain, to at least show some shred of the brother I sacrificed everything for. Instead, he handed me a manila envelope. "Your severance package," he said quietly. It's generous." Severance? After giving him $1.2 million of my own money? After working 100-hour weeks? After turning down job offers from Apple and Microsoft to stay and build our dream together? Severance. "Dylan, look at me," I demanded. And finally, he did. His eyes were red, guilty, but determined. "How long have you been planning this?" "Natalie, you don't understand. The company was stagnating. We needed fresh capital, fresh perspectives. Cassandra's firm is offering us a pathway to scale that we never could have achieved alone." "We?" I repeated. "There is no we in this decision. You made this choice without me, about my company, using my money." That's when Cassandra spoke up, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "Actually, Natalie, if you review your original partnership agreement, you'll find that Dylan holds majority controlling interest, 51%. You'll find that documented in Section 12, subsection 4. I stared at her, then at Dylan. 3 years ago, when we incorporated, Dylan had insisted on that structure. "Just a formality," he'd said, "in case we ever need to make quick decisions. You know I'd never use it against you." I'd trusted him. I'd signed without a lawyer present, because who needs legal protection against their own brother? The envelope in my hands felt like a death certificate, not just for my job, but for every naive belief I'd held about family loyalty, about shared dreams, about the people we trust with our hearts and our futures. But as I stood there in the conference room I'd designed, surrounded by strangers wearing expensive suits bought with my money, watching my brother avoid my gaze while dismantling everything I'd built, something cold and calculating settled in my chest. They thought I'd walk away quietly, take the severance, lick my wounds, find another job, and consider this an expensive lesson in trust. They had no idea what they'd just awakened. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I walked out of that building in complete silence. Not the dignified kind of silence, the shell-shocked kind. The kind where your body moves on autopilot while your brain tries to process what just happened. I made it 3 blocks before I had to stop and lean against a brick wall, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't unlock my phone. $1.2 million. Gone. My career at Goldman Sachs? Gone. 3 years of 18-hour days? Gone. And my brother, the person I'd trusted more than anyone else on this planet, had just used my own money to stab me in the back? The worst part? Everyone else in that room knew. Tommy at security, the new suits, even Janet from accounting gave me a pitying look as I walked past her desk with my pathetic little cardboard box of personal items. They all knew before I did. I was the last person to find out I'd been fired from my own company. I sat in my car for 2 hours in the Prism Analytics parking garage, the same garage where Dylan and I used to eat takeout Chinese food on the floor when we couldn't afford the office space upstairs, where we'd celebrated our first major client contract by sharing a bottle of champagne I'd bought with my last $50, where he'd promised me that we'd build something that mattered, something that was ours. The irony was crushing. I'd named our company Prism Analytics because prisms take white light and break it down to show you what's really there, all the hidden colors you couldn't see before. Turns out I should have turned that prism on my own brother. My phone buzzed. A text from Dylan. "Can we talk? I know you're hurt, but this is best for everyone. Trust me." Trust him? The same brother who just handed my life's work to a corporate vulture without even having the decency to warn me? I stared at those words until they blurred, and for the first time since I was 12 years old, I actually hated him. I typed back 4 words. "Don't contact me again." Then I drove home to my apartment in Riverside Heights, the expensive one I could afford because of my Goldman salary and my Prism dividends, both of which were now gone. I poured myself a glass of the Macallan 18 I'd been saving for when we went public, and I sat on my couch staring at the city lights of Millhaven through my floor-to-ceiling windows. That's when the real wave hit me. I'd given up everything for Dylan's dream. When headhunters from Apple called offering me a $250,000 signing bonus, I said no because Dylan needed me. When Microsoft wanted to poach me for their new AI division, I turned them down because we were family, and family sticks together. When my mentor at Goldman warned me that leaving Wall Street for a startup was career suicide, I'd laughed it off because I believed in us. I believed in a lie. The $1.2 million wasn't just money. It was my inheritance from Grandma Rose, the woman who'd raised me and Dylan after our parents died. It was the equity from my first apartment sold at a loss during the market dip. It was my entire 401k cashed out with penalties. It was every penny I'd saved working 100-hour weeks at Goldman for 5 years. And Dylan knew exactly what that money meant to me. He'd been there when I cried signing the inheritance papers. He'd helped me move out of the apartment I'd loved because I needed the cash for our company. He'd watched me eat ramen noodles for 6 months while I funneled every dollar into Prism's development. But apparently none of that mattered when Cassandra Price waved a bigger check in front of his face. My phone rang. Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Sweetheart, Dylan told me about the changes at work. He says it's all very complicated business stuff, but that you'll be fine. He's worried about you. Maybe you should call him back. Changes at work. That's how he'd spun it to our mother. Not he fired Natalie and stole my company. Not he betrayed the person who sacrificed everything for me. Just changes at work. I laughed then, but it came out as a sob. Even now, even after what he'd done, Dylan was still the golden child in Mom's eyes, still the brilliant little brother with the big dreams. And I was still the responsible older sister who was supposed to understand, supposed to forgive, supposed to clean up his messes without complaint. Well, not this time. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to every tech reporter in Millhaven. Prism Analytics founder fired by her own brother after $1.2 million personal investment. But I stopped before hitting send. Something cold and calculating whispered in the back of my mind. Don't get mad, don't get emotional, get smart. I closed the email and poured myself another drink. Because suddenly, I remembered something Dylan had obviously forgotten in his rush to cash out with Cassandra Price. Something buried in the paperwork I'd signed 3 years ago when I was too trusting and too stupid to read the fine print. Something that was about to turn his victory celebration into his worst nightmare. I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been buzzing like an angry hornet all night, but I'd turned off the sound after the 5th call from Dylan. Now, staring at the screen with a pounding headache and the taste of expensive whiskey coating my tongue, I realized something had gone very, very wrong. The first call was from my lawyer, Rebecca Sterling, at 6:47 a.m. That alone should have been my first clue. Rebecca didn't do early morning calls unless someone was either dead or about to be sued into oblivion. Natalie, call me back immediately. I don't care what time it is. This is urgent. The second voicemail was from Dylan, and I could hear the panic threading through his voice like a live wire. Nat, please, we need to talk. There's been a complication. The lawyers are saying things that don't make sense. Call me back, please. Then came the really interesting ones. Voicemail number 7 was from someone I didn't recognize, a man with a crisp, professional voice. Miss Hartwell, this is Jonathan Blackstone from Meridian Legal Group. We represent Nexus Capital. We need to discuss some contractual obligations that have come to our attention. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Contractual obligations? I sat up straighter, my hangover suddenly forgotten. Voicemail 12 was from Cassandra Price herself, and gone was the honey-sweet tone from yesterday. Now she sounded like she'd swallowed broken glass. Natalie, we need to have a conversation. Immediately. There are some documents that require clarification. I'm sure this is all just a misunderstanding. But it was voicemail 15 that made my heart stop completely. Miss Hartwell, this is David Chen from the Millhaven Business Journal. We've received some very interesting information about Prism Analytics, and we'd like to get your comment before we run the story, specifically about Section 15C of your original partnership agreement. Please call us back within the hour. Section 15C. I'd completely forgotten about Section 15C.
With shaking fingers, I opened my laptop and started digging through my email archives, searching for the original incorporation documents. 3 years of emails buried under client communications and development updates and investor pitches. Finally, I found it. A PDF attachment from our business attorney sent at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March 3 years ago. I opened the document and started reading. Page after page of legal jargon about equity distribution and decision-making authority and operational control. And then, buried on page 23 in subsection 15C, I found it. In the event of involuntary termination of either founding partner without unanimous board approval, the terminated partner retains the right to exercise a mandatory buyback clause at fair market valuation to be determined by independent assessment. Said buyback must be executed within 60 days of termination, with full payment due within 30 days of valuation completion. I read it again. Then a third time. Then I started laughing. Not the hysterical kind from last night, but the cold, calculating kind that comes when you realize your enemies have made a fatal mistake. Dylan had fired me without unanimous board approval. In fact, Dylan had fired me without any board approval at all, because until yesterday, our board consisted of exactly 2 people, him and me. The suits in that conference room weren't board members, they were Nexus Capital representatives, which meant, legally speaking, my termination was completely invalid. But more importantly, it meant I could force them to buy out my entire 49% stake at current market value. And after 3 years of explosive growth, multiple major client acquisitions, and the proprietary AI algorithms I developed, Prism Analytics was now worth approximately $4.8 million. 49% of $4.8 million was $2.35 million. Dylan owed me $2.35 million, and he had 30 days to pay it. My phone buzzed with another call. Dylan, again. This time, I answered. Natalie, thank God. Listen, the lawyers are saying there's some kind of clause. Section 15C. Mandatory buyback clause. I know. Silence. Then, Nat, you can't be serious. That was just boilerplate language. Nobody actually exercises those clauses. I do. You don't have that kind of money for legal fees. This could drag on for years. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Dylan, I think you seem to be confused about how this works. I don't need to sue you. The clause is automatically triggered by your illegal termination. You have 30 days to pay me $2.35 million, or I take controlling interest in the entire company. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, Natalie, please, think about what you're doing. This will destroy everything we built. No, I said softly. You already did that yesterday when you handed our company to Cassandra Price. I'm just collecting what is legally mine. We can work something out, maybe a payment plan, or 30 days, Dylan. And the clock started ticking the moment you fired me. I hung up and immediately called Rebecca Sterling. Rebecca, I need you to file paperwork immediately. Mandatory buyback clause, section 15C, 49% of Prism Analytics at fair market value. Natalie, are you sure about this? These kinds of clauses can get messy, and if they fight it, they won't fight it. They can't. My termination was illegal, and they know it. But I need that valuation done fast before they try to tank the company's worth. I'll have the papers filed by noon and a valuation expert contacted by end of day. But Natalie, this is going to get ugly. I looked out my window at the Millhaven skyline, at the gleaming towers where I used to work, where I used to trust, where I used to believe that family meant something. Rebecca, it already got ugly. Now it's about to get expensive. After I hung up, I poured myself a cup of coffee and opened my laptop again. Time to do some research on Nexus Capital and their golden girl, Cassandra Price. If they wanted to play corporate warfare, they were about to learn that they'd picked a fight with the wrong woman. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Cassandra. We need to meet. Name your terms." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, $2.35 million, cash, 30 days, non-negotiable. Her response came back in seconds. "We'll destroy you in court." I laughed and typed my final message, "Try me." Then I blocked her number and got back to work. Because they were about to learn that firing Natalie Hartwell wasn't just the biggest mistake of Dylan's career, it was about to become the most expensive one, too. The truth is, Dylan had been preparing to betray me long before Cassandra Paris ever walked into our office. I just hadn't seen it coming because I was too busy playing the role I'd been assigned since childhood. The responsible older sister who cleans on his messes and asks for nothing in return. It started when we were kids. Dylan was 8, I was 12, and our parents had just died in a car accident on I-74 during a winter storm. We went to live with Grandma Rose in her tiny house in Millhaven's East District. And that's where I learned that love comes with conditions, especially when resources are scarce. Dylan was the baby, the one who needed protecting. Dylan was brilliant but fragile, creative but impractical, a dreamer who needed someone practical to make his visions a reality. I became that someone. When he couldn't make friends, I shared mine. When he struggled at math, I did his homework. When he got suspended for hacking the school's computer system in 10th grade, I convinced the principal it was a misguided attempt to help improve their security. "Natalie takes care of everything," Grandma Rose used to say, patting Dylan's head while I washed dishes or folded laundry or balanced her checkbook. "She's got a good head for business." By the time we were in college, me at Wharton on a full scholarship, Dylan at MIT on my recommendation letters and financial support, the pattern was set. Dylan was the visionary, I was the executioner. He dreamed it, I built it. His first startup was called Cloud Vault, a data storage solution he invented in his dorm room junior year. The concept was brilliant, but Dylan couldn't code efficiently, couldn't manage timelines, and definitely couldn't handle investors. So I flew to Boston every weekend for 6 months, working 18-hour days to clean up his code, restructure his business plan, and pitch to venture capitalists. Cloud Vault sold for $400,000. Dylan kept $300,000. I got a thank you note and a promise that next time would be different. Next time was EcoRoute, a logistics app for sustainable shipping. Again, brilliant concept. Again, Dylan couldn't execute. I took a leave of absence from Goldman, unpaid, to spend 3 months in his crappy apartment in Somerville, living on coffee and takeout while I rebuilt his entire platform from the ground up. EcoRoute was acquired by a major shipping company for $1.2 million. Dylan bought himself a Tesla and a condo in Cambridge. I went back to Goldman with nothing to show for my time except the reputation for being unreliable. "You're enabling him," Marcus warned me over drinks one night. "He's never going to grow up if you keep rescuing him." But Marcus didn't understand. Dylan wasn't just my brother. He was my responsibility. After our parents died, I'd made a promise to Grandma Rose that I'd take care of him. And when she passed away during my senior year at Wharton, leaving us both her modest inheritance, that promise became the defining principle of my life. So when Dylan called me in January 3 years ago, crying because he was $40,000 in debt and facing eviction from his overpriced apartment, I didn't hesitate. I cashed out my 401k, sold my apartment, and moved to Millhaven to start Prism Analytics with him. "This time will be different, Nat," he promised, tears streaming down his face as I handed him a check for $50,000. "I've learned from my mistakes. We're partners this time, real partners, 50-50 on everything." Except it wasn't 50-50. It was 51-49 in his favor, just for legal purposes. And when we needed more capital 6 months later, I liquidated Grandma Riz's inheritance to keep us afloat. When our first major client demanded impossible deadlines, I worked 100-hour weeks to deliver, while Dylan networked at tech conferences. When we needed to hire developers, I trained them. When we landed our first $1 million contract, I negotiated it.
Dylan was the face of Prism Analytics. I was the engine. And for 3 years, I told myself this was partnership. I told myself that Dylan's name in TechCrunch articles and his keynote speeches at conferences were recognition for both of us.
I told myself that his equity controlling interest was just a technicality that would never matter. I was such a fool. The warning signs were everywhere if I'd been willing to see them. Like how Dylan started excluding me from client dinners, claiming I was too intense for relationship building. How he hired his college roommate as our CFO without consulting me, even though financial oversight was supposed to be my domain. How he moved his office to the executive floor while keeping mine in the development wing with the programmers. But the biggest warning sign was how he started talking about our company. Somewhere along the way, we built this became I built this. Our success stories became his success stories. Our future plans became his vision. Last Christmas, at our company holiday party, I overheard Dylan talking to a potential investor about Prism's origin story. I founded the company after my previous exits, he said, not mentioning my name once. My sister helped with some of the technical implementation in the early days. Technical implementation. 3 years of my life reduced to technical implementation. But I convinced myself it didn't matter. We were family. Blood was thicker than corporate politics. Dylan might take public credit, but he knew what I'd contributed. He knew what I had sacrificed. Except he didn't care. Because when Cassandra Price offered him a chance to play in the big leagues, to transform Prism Analytics from a successful regional company into a Silicon Valley powerhouse, Dylan saw only one obstacle to his dreams of tech stardom. Me. The responsible sister who asked difficult questions about burn rates and sustainable growth. The technical founder who understood our products better than he did. The equal partner who could challenge his decisions in front of important investors. So he eliminated the obstacle. And now, sitting in my apartment with legal papers scattered across my kitchen table and my laptop open to news articles about hostile takeovers, I finally understood the truth about Dylan that I'd spent 29 years refusing to see. My little brother had never needed protection. He'd needed competition. And I'd been too busy loving him to realize he'd been preparing to destroy me all along. The call from Rebecca came at 2:17 p.m., just as I was finishing my third cup of coffee and diving deeper into Nexus Capital's acquisition history. Her voice carried that particular tone lawyers get when they've discovered something that's about to change everything. Natalie, we need to talk. In person, now. An hour later, I was sitting in Rebecca's corner office overlooking Millhaven's financial district, watching her spread documents across her mahogany conference table like she was laying out evidence at a murder trial. I've been reviewing your partnership agreement all morning, she began, adjusting her glasses. And I have to ask you something important. When you signed this document 3 years ago, did you read section 23D? I frowned, trying to remember. Rebecca, I signed 50 pages of legal documents. I trusted my business attorney to handle the details. That's what I was afraid of. She slid a highlighted page across the table because your business attorney made a very interesting decision when drafting this contract. Look at this language. I read the highlighted section twice before the words started making sense. In addition to standard buyback provisions, co-founding partner retains perpetual first right of refusal on any equity transfer, merger, acquisition, or change of controlling ownership structure, regardless of current equity percentage held. Rebecca, translate this into English. She leaned back in her chair, and I could see the gleam in her eyes that meant someone was about to get very, very rich. It means Dylan can't sell the company to Nexus Capital without your explicit written consent. Ever. The perpetual clause means even if he bought your shares tomorrow, you'd still have veto power over any major transaction involving Prism Analytics. The room went completely silent, except for the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. But there's more,
Rebecca continued, clearly enjoying herself now. I called your original business attorney, James Crawford, to understand why he'd include such unusual language. Turns out he specialized in family business law before moving to corporate. He told me he always includes protective clauses for family members who contribute capital but hold minority stakes, specifically to prevent exactly what Dylan is trying to do to you. So Dylan can't sell to Nexus? Not with your signature. And here's where it gets really interesting. She pulled out another document. I had my research team pull Nexus Capital's filing with the SEC. They've already committed $8.2 million to acquire Prism Analytics, with contractual penalties if the deal falls through. They've told their investors the acquisition is a sure thing. My brain started calculating. $8.2 million for the whole company. That's right, which means your 49% stake is worth approximately $4 million, not the $2.35 million we calculated yesterday. But here's the beautiful part. Because of Section 23D, you don't have to settle for the buyback clause. You can block the entire sale and force them to negotiate with you directly. I stared at the documents, pieces clicking together like a puzzle I'd been unconsciously solving for 3 years. James Crawford knew this might happen.
He told me that when family members go into business together, especially when one is contributing significantly more capital or expertise than their equity share reflects, there's always a risk of betrayal. The protective clauses were his insurance policy for you. And Dylan signed this without reading it? Rebecca smiled. Dylan's signature is right there on page 37, witnessed and notarized. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling streets of Millhaven's business district. Somewhere down there, Dylan was probably in another conference room with Cassandra Price and her team of lawyers, trying to figure out how to salvage their deal. They had no idea that their entire acquisition was built on a foundation that I could destroy with a single word. No. Rebecca, what happens if I refuse to consent to the sale? Nexus Capital has 30 days to complete the acquisition, or they forfeit their earnest money and pay contractual penalties to their investors. We're talking about millions in losses for them. And Dylan? Dylan would be in breach of contract with Nexus Capital. They could sue him for damages, legal fees, and lost opportunity costs. He could lose everything. The irony was so perfect, it almost made me dizzy. Dylan had tried to eliminate me from our company using legal technicalities, but the same legal system he'd tried to exploit was about to become his worst nightmare. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Miss Hartwell, this is Jonathan Blackstone from Meridian Legal. We understand you may have concerns about recent corporate restructuring. We'd like to arrange a meeting to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution. I showed the message to Rebecca. They're scared. They should be. Word is already getting out in legal circles that the Prism acquisition hit a snag. I've had 3 calls this morning from other firms asking if it's true that a family member is blocking an $8.2 million deal. Another text came in, this one from Dylan. Nat, please, the lawyers are saying you can stop the sale. We can work something out. Call me. I looked at Rebecca. What's my position here? Legally, what can I demand? She opened her laptop and started typing. With Section 23D, you essentially have nuclear option power over the entire transaction. You can demand anything from a full buyout at premium valuation to equity restoration to ongoing royalties from the sale. Or, she paused dramatically, or what? Or you can demand they reverse your termination and restructure the deal to include you as an equal partner in the acquisition. Nexus Capital would essentially have to negotiate with both of you. The idea hit me like lightning. They'd have to treat me as an equal founding partner. More than equal. You'd be the partner with veto power over their entire investment. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I wanted. James Crawford, the business attorney who'd protected me 3 years ago without me even knowing it. He answered on the second ring. Natalie Hartwell, I was wondering when I'd hear from you.
James, did you know this day would come? He chuckled. I hoped it wouldn't. But I've been practicing family business law for 22 years, and I've seen this story before. The responsible sibling who enables, the charismatic sibling who takes. I wrote those protective clauses specifically for moments like this. What do you think I should do? That depends. Do you want your company back, or do you want revenge? I looked out at the Millhaven skyline, at the building where Prism Analytics was housed, where Dylan was probably pacing in panic right now. I want both. Then let's schedule a meeting with Nexus Capital. It's time they learned they're not acquiring a company, they're acquiring a partnership, and you are about to become their most important partner. As I hung up the phone, I realized that Dylan had made the same mistake he'd been making his entire life. He'd underestimated his big sister, and this time, that mistake was going to cost him everything. I spent the next 48 hours building my war room. Not the dramatic, wall-covered with strings kind you see in movies, but the methodical, spreadsheet-filled kind that actually wins corporate battles. My dining room table disappeared under financial projections, legal precedents, and background research on every person involved in this mess. I'd learned something valuable during my Goldman Sachs days. Information is power, but organized information is a weapon. First, I needed to understand exactly who I was fighting. Nexus Capital wasn't just another Silicon Valley investment firm. They were predators with a very specific playbook. Over the past 5 years, they'd acquired 17 companies, and their pattern was always the same. Identify promising startups with family ownership structures, exploit internal conflicts, acquire at below market valuation, then flip the companies to larger corporations within 18 months for massive profits. They'd done it to TechFlow Solutions in Portland, where they'd convinced one brother to betray another for a controlling stake. They'd done it to Prism Analytics in Austin, where they manipulated a father-daughter team into a hostile takeover. And now they were trying to do it to Prism Analytics. But they'd never encountered a situation quite like mine. I called Rebecca at exactly 9 a.m. Thursday morning. I want you to schedule a meeting with Nexus Capital for tomorrow afternoon. Conference room, formal setting, full legal representation. What's your strategy? I'm going to give them exactly what they want, a path to acquire Prism Analytics. But it's going to cost them triple what they plan to pay, and they're going to have to go through me to get it. The next step was more delicate. I needed an independent valuation of Prism Analytics that reflected its true worth, not the discounted price Nexus had negotiated with Dylan. I contacted 3 different business appraisal firms and paid for expedited assessments. The numbers that came back made me smile for the first time in days. Conservative estimate, $12.8 million. Aggressive estimate, $15.2 million. The AI algorithms I'd developed weren't just valuable, they were revolutionary. Prism's client retention rate was 94%. Our profit margins were 40% above industry standard, and our proprietary data visualization technology was at least 2 years ahead of our nearest competitor. Dylan had been planning to sell our company for $8.2 million. He was about to give away at least $4 million in value, probably because he didn't understand what we'd actually built. But I did. Friday afternoon, I walked into the Meridian Tower wearing my most expensive suit, the one I'd bought for investor meetings back when I thought I was building something with my brother. Rebecca accompanied me, along with James Crawford, who'd agreed to come out of semi-retirement for what he called the most interesting family business case of my career. The Nexus Capital team was already assembled in their glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor. Cassandra Price sat at the head of the table like she owned the building, flanked by 3 lawyers in identical navy blue suits. Jonathan Blackstone was there, along with 2 other men I didn't recognize, but who had the unmistakable look of people who move large amounts of money for a living. Dylan sat at the far end of the table, looking like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I took the seat directly across from Cassandra and placed a thick folder on the table in front of me. "Thank you for agreeing to meet.
Cassandra began, her voice honey-smooth but cautious. "We understand there may be some confusion about the Prism Analytics acquisition, and we're hoping to resolve any concerns you might have." "There's no confusion," I replied calmly. "I understand the situation perfectly. You want to acquire my company for $8.2 million. I have perpetual veto power over any such transaction, and you have 14 days left on your acquisition timeline before you face significant financial penalties." One of the Navy suit lawyers leaned forward. "Miss Hartwell, we're prepared to offer you a substantial consultation fee for your consent to the acquisition. Perhaps we could discuss—" "I don't want a consultation fee. I want a seat at the table." The room went completely silent. Cassandra's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you proposing?" she asked. I opened my folder and slid copies of my independent valuations across the table. Prism Analytics is worth between $12.8 and $15.2 million, not the $8.2 million you've agreed to pay. Your acquisition strategy has been based on incomplete information and internal manipulation. Dylan finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Nat, what are you doing?" I looked directly at him for the first time since entering the room. "I'm correcting your mistake, little brother." Then I turned back to Cassandra. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to restructure this acquisition as a three-way partnership. Nexus Capital will pay $15 million for a 60% controlling stake in Prism Analytics. Dylan will retain 20% as the original co-founder, and I will hold 20% as the technical co-founder and chief technology officer." "That's impossible," one of the Navy suit lawyers sputtered. "We've already committed to specific terms with Mr. Hartwell." "Then you should have done better due diligence," James Crawford said smoothly, "because Section 23D of their partnership agreement gives my client absolute veto power over this transaction. You can accept her terms, walk away, and forfeit your earnest money, or spend the next 2 years in litigation while your investors lose confidence and your other deals fall apart." Cassandra was staring at me like I was a chess opponent who just revealed a queen she hadn't seen coming. "Miss Hartwell, even if we agreed to these terms, what makes you think we'd want you as a partner? You were terminated for cause." I smiled. "Because I wrote the algorithms that make Prism Analytics valuable. I developed the client relationships that generate 70% of our revenue, and I understand the technology that your investors think they're buying. Without me, you're acquiring an overpriced shell company with a charismatic but ultimately replaceable CEO." I glanced at Dylan, whose face had gone pale. "With me, you're acquiring the next generation of data visualization technology and the person who can scale it globally." "This is extortion," Jonathan Blackstone said flatly. "No, this is business. You tried to manipulate a family conflict to acquire a valuable company at below market rates. I'm simply correcting the market inefficiency." I stood up and closed my folder. "You have until Monday morning to accept my proposal. After that, I exercise my veto power, your deal collapses, and I explore other acquisition opportunities. I've already had preliminary conversations with 3 of your competitors who'd be very interested in both Prism's technology and the story of how Nexus Capital tried to steal it." I paused and looked back at Dylan, who was staring at his hands like they held the answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. Because he knows that without me, Prism Analytics was never his company to sell in the first place. And because for the first time in his life, he's going to have to live with the consequences of underestimating his big sister. The elevator doors closed on a room full of very expensive lawyers who were about to have a very difficult weekend. The panic started Saturday morning at 7:23 a.m. I was in my kitchen making coffee when my phone exploded with notifications. 17 missed calls, 42 text messages, and an inbox full of emails marked urgent. The digital desperation was so thick I could practically taste it through the screen. The first voicemail was from Cassandra, and her honey-smooth composure had completely evaporated. "Natalie, we need to discuss this rationally. You're making demands that could destroy a deal that benefits everyone. Call me immediately." The second was from Dylan, and he sounded like he was having a nervous breakdown. Nat, they're saying the whole thing might fall apart. Mom called me crying because she heard rumors in town that I'm losing the company. Please, we have to fix this. But it was the third voicemail that made me sit down hard in my kitchen chair. Miss Hartwell, this is Patricia Vance from the Millhaven Business Journal. We've received some very interesting documents about Prism Analytics that suggest there may have been financial irregularities in the lead-up to the Nexus acquisition. We'd like to get your comment before we publish on Monday. Financial irregularities? I called Patricia back immediately. Miss Vance, what kind of documents are we talking about? Well, I can't reveal our sources, but we have bank statements, expense reports, and email communications that suggest significant company funds may have been misappropriated in recent months. Are you aware that your brother authorized $340,000 in consulting fees to a company called Strategic Dynamics LLC in the past 6 months? My blood turned to ice. I've never heard of Strategic Dynamics LLC. According to our research, Strategic Dynamics is owned by Miss Price's business partner at Nexus Capital. The payments were authorized without board approval and categorized as market research and competitive analysis. I was quiet for so long that Patricia asked if I was still there. Miss Vance, can you send me those documents? I can't share our source materials, but I can tell you that if these allegations are true, your brother may have been paying Nexus Capital to acquire his own company. We're planning to run the story on Monday morning unless someone can provide an alternative explanation. After I hung up, I sat staring at my coffee cup for 10 minutes, trying to process what I'd just learned. Dylan hadn't just betrayed me, he'd been paying Cassandra Price to help him do it. He'd stolen $340,000 from our company to fund his own backstabbing. My phone rang again. This time, it was Rebecca. Natalie, where are you? We need to meet immediately. I've been getting calls all morning from reporters, and there's something you need to see. An hour later, I was back in Rebecca's office, but this time we weren't alone. James Crawford was there, along with a woman I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that fills a room. Natalie, this is Amanda Chen from the SEC's Division of Enforcement. She's been investigating Nexus Capital for securities fraud, and your situation has become relevant to their case. Amanda Chen leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Miss Hartwell, we have reason to believe that Nexus Capital has been engaging in a pattern of market manipulation and fraudulent acquisitions. Your brother's payments to Strategic Dynamics LLC caught our attention because it's the same shell company they've used in 3 other suspicious deals. So this isn't just about Prism Analytics? No. We believe Nexus Capital has been systematically targeting family-owned businesses, creating internal conflicts, then acquiring the companies at artificially depressed valuations. Your case is actually the most clear-cut example we've found. Amanda Chen's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. That was my partner. Cassandra Price just tried to wire $2 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. We've frozen the transaction. She's running? She's trying to, but we've been monitoring all of Nexus Capital's financial activity since Friday. The moment you walked out of that conference room, they started moving money and destroying documents. Classic panic behavior. My phone started buzzing again. Another call from Dylan. Should I answer it? Amanda nodded. We're recording everything now. Let's see what he says. I put the phone on speaker. Nat, thank God. Listen, I need to tell you something about the consulting fees.
You mean the $340,000 you paid to Cassandra's shell company? The silence stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. How do you know about that? Dylan, the SEC knows about it. The Business Journal knows about it. By Monday morning, Everyone in Millhaven is going to know about it. You didn't just betray me, you committed fraud." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered, and I could hear him crying. "Cassandra said it was just standard consulting, that all acquisitions work this way. She said if I helped them understand the company's weaknesses, they could make a better offer." "Dylan, you paid them to acquire our company with our own money." "I know how it looks, but how it looks? Dylan, you stole from me. You stole from our employees. You stole from our clients. And then you fired me to cover it up." Amanda Chen was taking notes furiously. She handed me a piece of paper with a question written on it. "Ask him about the other payments." "Dylan, were there other payments to Nexus Capital or their affiliates?" Another long silence. "There were some travel expenses, and I had to pay for the due diligence work." "How much?" "Maybe another 100,000. But, Nat, they promised me this would make us both rich. They said after the acquisition, there would be opportunities for both of us at their other companies." I looked at Amanda Chen, who was nodding grimly. "Dylan, where are you right now?" "I'm at the office. Cassandra called a meeting for this afternoon. She says we can still salvage the deal if we present a united front against your demands." "Don't go to that meeting." "What? Why?" "Because Cassandra Price is currently trying to flee the country with stolen investor money, and you're about to become the fall guy for a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme." The line went dead. Amanda Chen looked at her watch. "We need to move fast. If Nexus Capital is planning one final meeting with your brother, they're probably going to try to make him sign documents that transfer all liability to him." Rebecca stood up. "What's our play?" Amanda smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "We're going to that meeting, all of us, and we're going to arrest everyone in the room except Dylan, assuming he's willing to cooperate as a witness." I stared at her. "You're arresting Cassandra Price today?" "Miss Hartwell, we've been waiting 8 months for Nexus Capital to make a mistake this obvious. Your brother just handed us the evidence we needed to shut down their entire operation." As we gathered our things to leave, I realized that Dylan's betrayal had accidentally accomplished something neither of us could have planned. It was about to destroy the predators who'd been manipulating families like ours for years. Justice, it turned out, had a sense of irony. We arrived at the Prism Analytics office at 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting Cassandra had called. Amanda Chen had 2 other federal agents with her, but they stayed in unmarked cars in the parking garage while we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. The plan was simple. Let the meeting proceed naturally until Nexus Capital incriminated themselves, then move in for arrests. I badged into the building using the emergency access code I'd never removed from the system, a small oversight on Dylan's part that was about to become very significant. Rebecca and James flanked me as we walked through the office I'd designed, past the workstations I'd configured, toward the conference room where my professional life had been destroyed just 1 week earlier. Through the glass walls, I could see them all assembled like actors in the final scene of a corporate thriller. Cassandra Price sat at the head of the table, looking remarkably composed for someone who'd attempted to flee the country 12 hours earlier. Jonathan Blackstone was there with 2 associates, laptops open, documents spread across the surface. Dylan sat off to the side, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen him since we were children. But there were new faces, too. A woman in an expensive red suit who I didn't recognize, and a man with silver hair who was clearly someone important based on how deferentially the others treated him. Amanda Chen's voice crackled through the tiny earpiece she had given me. "The woman in red is Sandra Liu, Nexus Capital's general counsel. The older man is Harrison Voss, their managing partner. This is bigger than we expected. They've brought in their top executives for damage control." I pushed open the conference room door and every conversation stopped. "Sorry I'm late," I said, taking the seat directly across from Cassandra. "I hope you haven't started without me." The tension in the room was so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. Dylan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Cassandra's composure flickered for just a moment before she regained control. "Natalie,
Thank you for coming. I think we can resolve the situation in a way that benefits everyone. I'm sure you do. But first, I'm curious about something. How long has Dylan been paying Strategic Dynamics, LLC?
The question landed like a grenade in the middle of the conference table. Sandra Lu's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. Harrison Voss's eyes snapped to Dylan with laser focus. "I'm not sure what you mean," Cassandra said carefully. "I mean the $340,000 in consulting fees my brother authorized over the past 6 months to a shell company owned by your business partner without board approval, using company funds that legally belonged partially to me." Dylan's face went white. "Nat, I can explain." "Can you?" "Because I've spent the weekend doing some very interesting research into Nexus Capital's acquisition history. TechFlow Solutions in Portland, they paid $180,000 in consulting fees before the acquisition. DataBridge Analytics in Austin, $225,000. Always the same pattern, always the same shell company." Harrison Voss leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. "Miss Hartwell, I think there may be some misunderstanding about standard business practices." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You identify family-owned businesses, corrupt the more malleable family member with bribes disguised as consulting fees, then acquire the companies at below-market rates. It's a brilliant scheme, really, except this time you made a mistake." I stood up and walked to the whiteboard at the front of the room, picking up a marker. "I assumed you didn't read my partnership agreement. I assumed I'd walk away quietly when Dylan fired me, and you assumed no one would notice the financial irregularities." I started writing on the board. Strategic Dynamics payments, $340,000. Additional consulting, $100,000. Company valuation manipulation, $7 million under value. SEC investigation, active. Wire transfer to Cayman Islands, frozen. Cassandra's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. Natalie, you're making wild accusations." "Am I? Because I have bank statements, email communications, and witness testimony that says otherwise. I also have federal agents in the parking garage who are very interested in discussing wire fraud, securities manipulation, and conspiracy charges with your team." The silence that followed was deafening. Dylan finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Federal agents? Dylan, did you really think you could steal $500,000 from our company and there wouldn't be consequences?" Harrison Voss stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. Sandra, we're leaving. Now." "Actually," said a new voice from the doorway, "I don't think you are." Amanda Chen walked into the conference room, followed by 2 other agents. She held up her badge. "Special Agent Amanda Chen, Securities and Exchange Commission. Nobody leaves this room until we're finished talking." What happened next was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Sandra Lu immediately started demanding lawyers. Jonathan Blackstone began frantically closing laptops. Harrison Voss tried to maintain his composure, but kept glancing toward the door like a trapped animal. And Cassandra? Cassandra looked directly at me with something that might have been respect. "You played this very well," she said quietly. "I learned from the best. You taught me that family loyalty is a weakness that can be exploited, but you forgot that intelligence runs in my family too." Amanda Chen placed a hand on Cassandra's shoulder. "Cassandra Price, you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities manipulation, and conspiracy to commit fraud. You have the right to remain silent." As they read her rights, I looked around the conference room where my professional life had been destroyed 1 week ago. Dylan sat frozen in his chair, staring at his hands. The Nexus Capital team was being separated and read their rights, and I was standing in the middle of it all. No longer the betrayed sister or the fired co-founder. I was the woman who'd brought down an entire criminal enterprise. Amanda Chen finished with the arrests and approached me. "Miss Hartwell, we're going to need Dylan to cooperate as a witness. His testimony will be crucial for prosecuting the broader conspiracy." I looked at my brother, who finally raised his eyes to meet mine. "What happens to him?" "If he cooperates fully and helps us recover the stolen funds, we can discuss immunity. He was manipulated, but he still committed crimes." Dylan stood shakily. "Nat, I know I don't deserve to ask, but will you help me? I don't know how to fix this."
For 31 years, I'd been fixing Dylan's mistakes, cleaning up his messes, enabling his dreams at the cost of my own stability. But as I stood in that conference room, watching federal agents escort corporate criminals out in handcuffs, I realized something had fundamentally changed. Dylan, I'll help you cooperate with the investigation. I'll make sure you have good legal representation. But I'm done fixing your life for you anymore. This time, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your choices. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. What happens to Prism Analytics? I smiled, and for the first time in a week, it felt genuine. Prism Analytics belongs to me now. The partnership agreement you never read gives me controlling interest when the majority partner commits fraud. Congratulations, little brother. You just lost your own company. As the conference room emptied and the chaos died down, I found myself alone with Rebecca and James Crawford. So what now? Rebecca asked. I looked out the window at the Millhaven skyline, at the city where I'd built a company, lost a family, and discovered exactly how strong I could be when I stopped apologizing for my intelligence. Now, we rebuild, but this time, we do it right.
6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where my world had collapsed, but everything was different now. The mahogany table was gone, replaced by a collaborative workspace with modular furniture and whiteboards covered in algorithm sketches. The formal portraits had been swapped for employee recognition boards and innovation timelines. And the nameplate on the door no longer read Prism Analytics. It read Hartwell Data Solutions. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first month after the arrests was chaos. Half of our clients panicked when the fraud story broke in the Business Journal, terrified that their data had been compromised. Our development team was demoralized by the revelation that Dylan had essentially been selling the company out from under them. And I had to rebuild trust with employees who'd watched me get fired only to discover I was now their sole owner. But chaos, I'd learned, was just another word for opportunity. The FBI's investigation had frozen all of Nexus Capital's assets, including the $8.2 million they'd committed to acquire Prism Analytics. That money was now evidence in a federal fraud case that would eventually recover millions for victims of their scheme. But more importantly, the investigation had exposed just how valuable our technology actually was. When federal forensic accountants audited our systems, they discovered that our AI algorithms weren't just revolutionary. They were being actively copied by 3 major corporations who'd gained access through Nexus Capital's network. The patent infringement lawsuits alone were worth more than the original acquisition offer. I hired the best intellectual property lawyers money could buy, and within 4 months, we'd secured licensing deals worth $23 million over 5 years. Suddenly, Hartwell Data Solutions wasn't just surviving the scandal, we were thriving because of it. But the real transformation came from something much more personal. Dylan had cooperated fully with the SEC investigation, testifying against Cassandra Price and the entire Nexus Capital operation. His testimony helped convict 17 people and recover over $40 million in fraudulent acquisitions. In exchange, he received immunity from federal prosecution, though he still faced civil liability for the money he'd misappropriated. We met for coffee 3 weeks after the last trial concluded. He looked older, more tired, but there was something in his eyes I hadn't seen since we were children. Accountability. I keep expecting you to yell at me, he said, stirring his latte nervously. I'm not angry anymore, Dylan. Anger requires energy, and I'm using all of mine to build something better. The company looks amazing. I saw the TechCrunch article about your new government contracts. I nodded. We're working with the Department of Defense on cybersecurity visualization. Ironically, my military contractor application was fast-tracked because of my cooperation in the fraud investigation. And the foundation? That was the part I was most proud of. The Hartwell Foundation for Family Business Ethics was my answer to what Cassandra Price had done to so many families.
We provided free legal consultation, contract review, and mediation services for family-owned businesses facing internal conflicts. In 6 months, we'd prevented 4 acquisitions that showed signs of manipulation and helped 7 families restructure their partnerships equitably. We just hired our 5th full-time attorney, and we're opening a 2nd office in Austin next month. Dylan was quiet for a long moment. I owe you $440,000, plus interest, plus damages. My lawyer says it could be years before I can pay it all back. Dylan, I don't want your money. He looked up, startled. I want your cooperation. The foundation is going to launch a program for family business education, teaching people how to structure partnerships, how to recognize manipulation, how to protect themselves from predators like Nexus Capital. I want you to help develop the curriculum. You want me to work for you? I want you to work with me, to help other families avoid what we went through, to make sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. His eyes filled with tears. Why would you trust me with that? Because you understand both sides now. You know what it feels like to be manipulated, and you know the consequences of betraying family. That makes you uniquely qualified to teach others. We worked together on the program for the next 4 months. Dylan threw himself into the project with an intensity I hadn't seen since we were kids coding together in Grandma Rose's basement. He interviewed victims of corporate manipulation, researched predatory acquisition tactics, and developed case studies that we now use in business schools across the country. The program launched with a keynote speech I gave at the National Family Business Conference. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of entrepreneurs and family business owners, I told our story, not for revenge or sympathy, but as a warning and a guide. My brother and I learned the hard way that family loyalty without legal protection is just a weakness waiting to be exploited. But we also learned that betrayal, while painful, doesn't have to be permanent. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is the chance to earn back their trust through service to others. The audience gave us a standing ovation. But more importantly, 3 families approached us afterward to say they'd recognized warning signs in their own businesses and wanted help restructuring their partnerships. Today, Hartwell Data Solutions employs 47 people and generated $31 million in revenue last year. The Hartwell Foundation has helped over 200 family businesses protect themselves from predatory acquisitions. Dylan runs our education program and has become one of the most sought-after speakers on family business ethics in the country.
And me? I wake up every morning in my corner office, the one I designed, in the building I chose, running the company I built. And I remember the girl who used to apologize for being smarter than her little brother. I don't apologize anymore. People ask me if I ever regret how things turned out, if I miss the relationship Dylan and I used to have, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is complicated. I miss the innocence of believing that family love was unconditional. I miss the simplicity of taking care of someone without expecting anything in return. I miss the version of my brother who needed me to fix his problems. But I don't miss being taken for granted. I don't miss sacrificing my dreams for someone else's ambitions. And I don't miss the woman I used to be, the one who thought her value came from what she could give rather than what she could build. Every year, on the anniversary of Dylan's betrayal, I light a candle in my office. Not for forgiveness, that came naturally once he started earning it. Not for revenge, justice had been served in federal court. I light it for the woman who walked out of that conference room with nothing but a cardboard box and discovered she was strong enough to burn down an entire criminal enterprise and build something beautiful from the ashes. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's becoming the person your enemies never believed you could be.